All right, welcome back to AI for Enterprise. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next panel is titled Organizational Change, People and Process. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, panelists. We're so excited to have you here. Attendees, welcome back to the Organizational Change track. As Patrika said, we're going to be talking about the role of people and process when it comes to AI. I'm really excited for this one. We have some wonderful talent here, and I'll be your moderator. I'm Daniel Lackland. You should know me. And without any further ado, let's have each panelist go ahead and just introduce themselves in no particular order. Yash, would you like to kick it off and say who you are and why you're on an AI panel?
Sure. Hey, thanks, Dan, for kind of having me here. Super excited to speak with everyone. Just to talk a little bit more about myself, my name is Yash Desai. I'm currently working with Wayfair for about a year now, and I head one of the B2B machine learning teams. I've been in this the data science machine learning space for close to 10 years now. Before machine learning and AI were like more mainstream words, like they were called predictive analytics and whatnot. So now I've gone through a long adventure of working across industries, across geographies. So I'm excited to kind of share my experience with all of you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Yash. Janak, would you like to introduce yourself for the attendees?
Thank you, Dan. Excited to be here. I'm Janak Athreya, and I manage the data solutions and governance and analytics team at Grainger. And my experience with AI is AI and data and processes. Like Yash, I think it's been probably the last 10 years before AI and data became, let's call it, became more sexy, being in the space, working with organizations, leveraging data.
Excellent, thank you. And certainly last but not least, or last but certainly not least, I should say, excuse me, Jeff.
Yep, Jeff Richardson. I am the Vice President of Technology and Data for a company called PPD, which stands for Pharmaceutical Product Development. We are a contract research organization, which is something that most people have never heard of, but we enable integrated drug development, laboratory services, and lifecycle services for pharma tech companies. So when Pfizer or Moderna makes a COVID vaccine, for instance, we do all the laboratory work, we do a lot of the data collection, the biostats, and the division that I work for, and I am the CIO of, we recruit and enroll patients into clinical trials and then run those clinical trials. So I've been in the data and AI space for about 17 years, heavy into machine learning and AI for about 10 of them. And for AES, the Accelerated Enrollment Services at PPD, one of the groups that I manage is our Data Science and Applied Stats group, which uses AI, machine learning, and data modeling to predict enrollment in clinical trials, and then also do adaptive pricing and do a lot of really complicated data modeling around how a trial might end up enrolling and running through its sort of life cycle.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. We're really excited to have you all here. Patrika, why don't we jump into question number one? Okay, AI is relatively new, which means most companies did not have a team labeled the one-stop AI shop 10 years ago. Because of this, the question is, how do you set up your organizational structure to do AI work as you're building these new systems? And Jeff, I would be honored if you would just go ahead and start us off here with this question.
This is because of how you introduced me, isn't it?
You're number one.
That's fine. That's fine. It's fine. It's okay. I don't have feelings. So AI is a very funny term, right? Because there's so much depth and breadth around AI and how you define what AI means. It kind of defines how you set up your team around how that works. What we do is a lot of machine learning through AI and a lot of applied statistics. So my team is set up in a way that I've got like a data engineering organization that supplies kind of like the raw material data to my applied stats and data scientists, who then those users interact heavily with my business users, kind of deal a lot with managing the requests. They're very business savvy, very clinically well-versed in what they do, because again, a lot of what we do is like running clinical trials. And then they really dive into a lot of the AI and ML that gets into how those data models might work. There's a lot of iterative approaches with our clinical staff, with our salespeople, with the sponsors that we do trials with. And then ultimately that output is then fed back to them either through the data scientists themselves or through our enterprise information team as kind of like the end of that supply chain of how the information flows through that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. Janak or Yash, would either of you like to jump in here and talk about organizational structure here?
Yeah, I can chime in, Dan. So when you look at the organizational structure, I think a couple of different organizational structures have worked. I would say either a hub and spoke model, and depending on how you want to set up the structures, depending on how the organizational, whether it's a complex organization or a relatively not complex organization in terms of processes and the business technology, either of the approaches have worked. And I've found that having a hub to have the centralized analytics, the governance, and the processes to say how the models will work, how you can deploy, those kind of things have worked better having it centralized in a hub model. And that's some of the things that I've found.
Yeah.
Yash, do you want to add something?
No, yeah, I was going to say, jump on the bandwagon there. I've had like similar experiences, and going back to my early days, I used to consult with McKinsey, and there was the other question of how do you want to like set them up for success once we leave, and then this was the question: hey, how do we set up the organization structure? And there are two trains of thought. Like one, you could have like a decentralized structure where every business unit has its own kind of machine learning AI team, or you could go down the other route, which Janak mentioned around, let's have a center of excellence, let's have a centralized team, which then kind of feeds into these different business units. So from what I've seen across like different organizations, I think the second one, the more centralized organization structure kind of works really well. And then you think of the different life stages, which we can talk about in more detail later, but you do want to think about the infrastructure. So how do we get the data? So you need data engineers. Once you have processed the data, you need like machine learning scientists or your data scientists to kind of make sense of the data, build the algorithms. And then you need like even like more refined ones, have like product managers kind of make sense of the output of the model and then take it to the business. So that's typically how I see like, setting up an organization. You want to make sure you have your infrastructure in place first, and then kind of build the personnel around it across the different life cycle stages.
Yeah, I completely.
What I have found.
Oh, go ahead, Janak. So I was going to say, I've lived through both of those, and I kind of came into my current role in the more centralized model. The hub and spoke one sounds great all the time, but inevitably you lose to the economies of scale, right? You get spokes that are totally isolated and they become silos. You lose all the synergy that like a centralized group kind of feeds on itself, and it becomes this flywheel of sort of sharing. And I have yet to find a really, really, really robust, I've yet to find a model where every single spoke on that hub and spoke model is able to be as optimal in sharing as possible. It always, something always ends up slightly dissident.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, I tend to agree to a large extent, but what happens is if you just have a centralized model, the learning across the organization, once the organization becomes a little bit more mature, your spoke, that's when all the development, the integrated, the spokes will work very well once the organization becomes mature and you have built up the AI models and the learnings have been all, it's slightly more mature. So the spoke works only when it's much more of a mature organization. The centralized model is when you're starting it off. At least until you become mature, the centralized model works much better.
Yeah, the spoke, I mean, I totally agree. The spoke model is the only way it scales to a large enough organization, for sure. And that's where you have to get to. But it's just, it is a slog to get there.
Yeah, no, I
agree with you there.
Especially when you're starting out, you do want to create that community where, you are able to share knowledge across the different like data scientists. I think it generates a lot more innovation if data scientists across like, if someone's working in marketing and someone's working in sales are able to share their information, their knowledge. Otherwise, if you're siloed into like, one of these business units, then you might be ending up solving a lot of good business problems, but you may not have enough like synergies, like you mentioned, Jeff, to kind of share across the group, saying that, hey, I tried a neural network and it worked really well in this problem, but it did not work in this other problem. And then someone in sales said, yeah, bingo, that's exactly what I've faced. And, let me try out what you've done.
I have that problem now in the teams that I manage, like my own hub. Like I have problems where the teams themselves say to me, they feel like they're siloed. So like I am just not the person that has solved that yet. So if anybody has any advice in the audience or on this panel, please let me know.
Thank you so much for all of your perspective. It's really cool to hear. Patrika, why don't we jump to the next question? Okay, great. So I suspect this will be a really interesting one. Who handles challenges related to AI ethics at your organization? Is this a new group, or has a previously existing team expanded their repertoire? I know it's a challenging question, but I think a lot of attendees are really interested in it. Yash, I'm curious on your perspective on this topic.
Sure. No, thanks for letting me speak on it. So maybe we'll set the context first on what AI ethics mean, because it could mean different things to different people, and I'll let you know how I think about it. So in my mind, there's like two aspects to AI ethics. One is the design, meaning how are you building your models, what data you're using to build those algorithms. And then the second part is how do you use the output of these models? So from what I've seen across like, my experience so far, typically there's like, first of all, there's the responsibility on each and every data scientist or person who's working with the data to, to show that ethic. Number two, like depending on the industry, it varies a lot. So, and I'll take a few examples to kind of substantiate. When I was in healthcare, we had a really, really strong privacy and legal team, which we would absolutely need sign off on for everything we build. So, and I can go into details like to kind of give an example. You cannot use certain kinds of data for pricing, the premium for insurance, whereas you could use it for some healthcare benefits. So if you want to predict who's likely to be more, hospitalized, you can definitely use that kind of data, but not for price. By the legal team, which we had to follow. And then the other aspect of it is geography. So, and I can take an example from my current role at Wayfair, where we are scaling to Europe, and Europe has a completely different privacy regulations where through GDPR. So again, we work with a legal team in Europe to make sure that we are complying with the local regulations. We're not using data. For example, we might have credit card information, which we can use in the US, but we may not be able to use in Europe. So it's typically the legal team or the privacy team that kind of plays that gatekeeper role for us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Janak, Jeff, would either of you like to jump in here as well?
I mean, this is my soapbox. I speak about this on Clubhouse. In my last job, I spent like the last year that I was there talking about this. So as far as kind of with the end of what you were saying there about global compliance and global AI, I think this is going to be the biggest focus point over the next 5 years, and a spot that a lot of companies need to be cognizant of now, especially in AI, with models they don't really understand what they're doing, right? The ethics of, imagine a future ethics framework that is GDPR, but for AI, and a person can come back to you and say, I want to opt out of not just your marketing spam, but also all of your AI algorithms. You have to prove to me you've taken me out of those. Like the work that involved, the work that underpins doing that successfully and auditably is tremendous. And I think a lot of companies need to spend a lot more time thinking about how that works. At my last job, we were starting to spend a very large amount of time trying to invest in ways to build a framework that let us take people in and out of AI models. In my current role, obviously we're doing pharma tech, we're doing a lot of medical stuff. There is a huge quality role, there's a huge compliance role. There are a lot of laws and regulations around how healthcare data is managed. So we just follow those rules for a lot of how that works, and we're very careful there. But there are still all of the normal global compliance laws that we have to follow with how people get put into those trials, how their data is used in models and predictive models and in descriptive models. So yeah, I mean, this is just a huge area for me as far as focus and passion.
And to add to Jeff's point, I was reading a HBR article which was talking about how the customers can opt in and out. One of the topics that they were talking about is how do you build frameworks where the customers can opt in and out of being in an AI model or not, and what are the frameworks that you would actually need to build. And that's some of the things that we struggle with as you look at it, and whether it's the financial industry or the health industry, how do you actually say what data can be used for which purpose, and how do you put governance models around the usage of the data, as well as what kind of data is being used. And I think that's one of the challenges that we are facing, to say what kind of governance is there, and then how can you prove that you actually implemented all those governance, because it's not just about having the governance, but it's about the abilities to say, I actually have taken out all this data, I've actually built all the models, and this is my proof that you can actually go through and say, yep, this works, and this is how the models have been built. And
in a lot of cases, how do you even do that? Like we use a lot of short-lived models that like we use to predict like a trial over like the pricing of a trial over 6 weeks or whatever. So we're iterating through them quickly. And if somebody wants to be removed, you can remove them in 6 weeks. But like if you deploy something to some edge device that's like just a packaged up model you've deployed, how do you take somebody out of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just that, how do you take it out? How do you prove that you've taken it out? And how do you have documented proof that that's what you've done? I think that's where it becomes more challenging.
Complexity is like, just by design, a lot of the AI models are black boxes, right? If you build a neural network, you don't know what's going, like, what's going in, but you don't know how it's being, manipulated inside. So that becomes like a whole other challenge.
Yeah, I just keep coming back to, I think there is a lot of liability here. And I very quickly see some GDPR AI framework coming out. Once people realize how scary this is, which is going to happen soon, like the Facebook whistleblower stuff that's going on right now, like that's going to be the water over the dam that just kind of knocks everything out. Like this is going to be fascinating to watch over the next like 6 to 24 months.
So cool. So cool to hear all your perspectives. Patricia, want to jump to the next topic? Okay, cool. So in order to execute on AI projects, what are the stages in the life cycle of a project, and who do you need to sign off on these stages along the way? Janak, would you like to kick off this question?
I mean, when I think about the stages of the project, it's about how do you look at the siloed work to an interdisciplinary collaboration, from experience-based, leader-based decision-making to data-driven decision-making at the front line, and also looking at how do you build the agile, adaptive, experimental approach. I think those are the main stages. And as you look at it, along each stage gate of the way, the different stakeholders would be primarily the business stakeholders who are interested in the decision-making of the data, I would say the engineers and folks that have built the models to say, how robust is the model? Have you validated all the tests? Have you passed through all the iterations that you need to pass through? And is the data solid enough? And then on the other side, when you actually have the model ready to deploy, it's about having the governance, the compliance, and the security to say, hey, does this work? And then the last stage gate is at the IT side to say, is this scalable? Can you deploy it? And what are the guardrails that you need to have to deploy the model? So I think these are the main 4 stage gates that you would have. Jeff, you want to add anything to that? I see you nodding.
So I was actually making notes of what I would kind of in my head like put as those gates, and as you were talking, I was like 3 letters behind you every time you were talking just now. I would say one of the gates that I'm doing an interesting problem right now, trying to prove out capacity of clinical trials. Because one of the hard things to do with trials at sites is you may have one site, we have like 150 sites around the world that we run trials at, and they run 300 trials. There's all this overlap with these trials. So it's hard to figure out like who has capacity to take more on and who's overworked and who's going to have a problem because they have this long tail of like 7 more years of like stuff to do. So we're trying to build a predictive model that can predict capacity constraints in the future based on inputs now. And the biggest problem we're having is just defining the problem, getting people to agree on what we're going to predict and how it's going to work. So that's like the #1 stage gate problem I see in these things is actually like, what are you doing and what's the outcome you're going to have at the end? It's really easy to say like, build me a model that predicts capacity, but like what does that mean? Like the physician capacity or the physical room capacity or patient capacity? And what does capacity even mean? Is that like a person per day, per half an hour, whatever? So like, that's a huge milestone that we have to get past. And then the second one is actually proving you have the data to go do any of that. Because the second thing we're realizing in this example that I'm working on, which is painful because I was just on a meeting about this, is we're not even sure we have all of the information we need to accurately even do this. And then everything that you said, right? The iteration, the testing, the deployment, and the governance, that's all huge, but the first 2 are killing me now.
Yeah, I mean, I would jump on that. Like the first one, I'm like super passionate about, and that's what I pound the table always with my business stakeholders. Like, you know you want something, but you really don't, right? So make sure you have you want to have the right this project. So that's like the biggest thing. What is success for you at the end of this model? And the other thing that I often try to do, like I use this, famous quote from Warren Buffett that, 9 women cannot produce a baby in 1 month. So they often say, oh, why don't we have like 2 data scientists working on this project at the same time and finish it in half the time? But no, these are sequential steps. So you cannot like bypass the life stage to the 3rd step before doing the 2nd step. So yeah, I think it's a very, very relevant topic.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that euphemism before, that 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, you need to have operational inputs, business inputs right from the beginning. Otherwise, this doesn't work. In defining the question, I think we spend more time on defining what's the question. When we talk about predictive analytics, it's like, what do you want to predict and how accurate do you want to be, and what are your variations? What are you looking for? I think if I can get the business to answer that question, I'm already halfway successful because I know I can build the model. It's just about getting them to answer the questions.
The specificity even of just an answer on what you want to get to is so critical in that. It's so hard for people to define. Like, what do you want me to predict in the future? Is it scheduling of an hour, of a day, of a week, of like, what is it? Define for me what that criteria thing is that you want. And then they look at you like, well, I mean, I don't know, kind of all of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And then building the trust, saying that, hey, the model works. That's the other major challenge I have. It's like, yeah, I'll build all the model, but after that, oh, I don't think I can trust that model. That's another big hurdle that we have.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Patricia, you want to jump to the next topic? Okay, let's talk about hiring. Do you hire people with AI talent? If so, who do you hire and how do you entice them to work for you? Jeff, I'd be curious on your perspective on this topic to kick it off.
I refuse to answer this question on the grounds that it will give people insight into how we hire people. No, I'm kidding. I'm sort of kidding. Or I can give the wrong answer and then trick people. Either way, you'll never know now. So we generally, in seriousness, we don't really aim for people who have specific AI backgrounds, mostly because it's so hard to find anybody right now. Like the last 18 months has made hiring anybody with this kind of background impossible. We generally right now look for people who have some kind of hard tech background, some sort of STEM background, either applied statistics or mathematics or regular statistics, computer science, even any of like the tangential sciences like physics or anything in those areas. And then we kind of train them up on what we want to do. It's a lot easier to get somebody who wants to learn and think a certain way and then train them to do what you, like the framework you want them to follow, than it is to kind of undo a bunch of preconceived learnings they've had from other ways they've done things, other ways things have worked really well for them that might not work in your industry. So really we aim for people who have like the right mindset and then build them up from there. I have people who have PhDs in mathematics, people who have bachelor's degrees in biochemistry, people who have degrees in applied statistics, and people who have degrees in like A+ certifications. And they're all equally very effective.
Yeah, I think I would like to add to that, like having the right mindset and, some sort of a quantitative background is typically what I look for as well. I also often look for like the energy, like, I want to see the candidate, if they, it's fine if they don't have the skills, but they do, I would like to see them to have the will to kind of learn. And again, depending on the level at which you're hiring, right? So if it's someone more junior, they may or may not have had the right skill set, but you can coach them. But at the more senior levels, I typically do look for someone, who's kind of played that role before and, can bring in that expertise to coach and, and develop the more junior team members. The other thing I keep in mind is, what business problem I'm trying to solve. So again, to take an example, if it's a text related problem, I might look for someone with, certain kind of background. So you don't want like a PhD in like neural networks to solve something super simple. They'll get bored and they'll eventually leave. So make sure you kind of, understand the problem you're trying to solve and then match the skill set accordingly. Otherwise, it's not going to be a great fit. Janak, anything you want to add?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing, as you pointed out, is I look for passion. And the other thing is someone who can think end-to-end business problem versus just, I look for a blend of both the technical skills and the ability to think end-to-end business problem, because most of the times the combination of the technical skills and the ability to interact with the stakeholders and ask the right probing questions and build the relationships to get the answers and build the trust, that combination is what I find, other than everything else, but both Jeff and Yash have mentioned, that's the one thing that I like to look for in candidates.
Yeah, having that
and at a
business
senior
acumen
level
is critical.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. And at a senior level, I look for more of collaborators and people who can move culture in an organization, because AI, when I typically, the one thing that's missing in most of the AI projects is how do you move from let's call it an experience-based or a leader-driven to a data-driven approach. And that requires moving culture in an organization, and the leaders who are able to take AI and demystify and actually relate to an organization and tell people what AI can bring to the table. That's kind of what I look for in the leaders, because when you look at a relationship manager, he's going to say, hey, AI is going to throw me out of work. It's no. If you take AI and if you can use the AI models to help change the customer experience, that's what's going to make it powerful. And you need a leader in AI who can actually talk to the stakeholders and sell them that concept. And that's what I would look for in a leader. Not necessarily just all the technical aspects, which is hugely important. But if you have the blend of both, that's what makes it hugely powerful.
I am starting to notice, like on the technical skills, a lot of what we use is becoming commoditized. Like the skills that were really hard to get people to learn, and you had to like kind of like really spend a lot of time digging through academic papers or figuring things out or coding. Now, Data Robot just gives you a service that runs it. You pay pennies on the run or whatever. Or like Microsoft has a whole AI suite. You just kind of press a button and connect things.
AWS gives you so many models.
Exactly. It's becoming, it's much more important to understand what to connect to where as you build your neural network than it is to like understand exactly how a neural network works. It's great if you can, it's fantastic, but you don't really need that anymore to be really productive.
That's absolutely true. And I mean, the second part of the question was like, how do you entice these people? And one thing which I've really found is that works is, building a community, right? So where people can interact. They can go to like conferences together. There are blog posts that they can do. I think that kind of creates that sense of community and, just that culture which drives these data scientists. And going back to our first question, if they're out in silos, they kind of get, a little antsy. So I do like to create, that sense of community within the group.
Thank you all for your answers. Oh, sorry.
Go
Go ahead, Jeff.
Daniel. Go ahead. No, I'm good. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I really appreciate the perspective all of you are bringing. It sounds like all of you are doing a fair bit of training and development around these various projects, rather than necessarily prioritizing specific skill sets in data science teams or otherwise. Do you have programs in place to do the training that are very scalable and sort of well integrated into the company, or is it all sort of as needed and you're adapting as things change? What does the training look like for all this stuff?
I would
Questions
say
open to
it's
anybody.
adapted. I would say it's adapted along the way, and it's not necessarily a single training program. We do have a little bit of structured training programs, but at the same time, it's about what do you want for that particular team and how do you want to adapt.
Yeah, we also like set up starter projects for like the first 2 months or so that, okay, it's a well-defined project. So if you don't have a certain skill set, this kind of within the constraints lets you kind of build those skills without the pressure of, hey, you need to deliver something to the business right away as you jump in. So that kind of helps them get the hands-on experience on the job without the pressure of delivery.
Yeah, we have a spin up kind of starter template we use for training. And then once you get some familiarity, we actually have a cross-training function that we've enabled, which kind of gives you like, 3 months in this role, 3 months in this role, 3 months in this role, which has really helped give people like a broad training across a lot of our areas.
Cool.
Yeah, we have something similar. We have the same FTP program where you rotate across the different groups.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Patricia, let's jump to the next question. Okay, so do you work with third-party AI experts or sellers of AI-powered software? If so, how do you select the right partners and work with them effectively? Janak, would you like to kick us off here?
I think I would like to pass this question because I don't know if I can answer this question.
Fair enough. Yash, would you like to kick off this question?
Yeah, I can give a bit more of a generic answer. And going back to philosophy of like build or buy, and it again could go in either direction. So if you're starting off, if you don't have the infrastructure or the personnel, you often go down the route of buying because you don't have the luxury of building something. What I've seen that works is if there's a very specific problem that you're trying to solve, for which internally you don't have either the capacity or the capability, that's when like we've gone and not specific to Wayfair, but just generally we've gone on to like buying solutions. But that's been rare, especially because I've worked at like larger organizations. And then the other thing could be if something requires a lot of manual effort, like, people in AI might be familiar, like you want to label the data, which if you are asking humans to do it, it could take months, but there are software out there which could do it for you. I think that's when, we could go down the round of buying. And then the other thing which we've used for buying is sometimes a lot of these services are bundled. So if you buy third-party data, they might also give you a service along with it, which is AI powered. So I think the third-party data, we also got the service as a byproduct.
Yeah, my answer to this is kind of all over the place. We engage with third-party vendors who sell us data and sell us AI services that they build themselves. We use a lot of older technologies for how we do a lot of our data modeling and data pipelines now, like a lot of things that are 10 and 15 years old. One of the things I've been working on recently is a plan to uplift that to a lot more agile software as a service kind of methods for that. But we certainly do a lot of both of those, and we subscribe, kind of like Yash was saying, to a lot of data services just by themselves that give us data we put into different applications, different processes, different AI algorithms, who also give the ability to use other services as well. We don't take a lot of advantage of those. Part of the reason is a lot of what we do is the secret sauce of how we do a lot of our throughput in recruitment. So we don't really want to get too tightly integrated into somebody else's services. But also it's just because we can generally build a little bit of that right now with what we have. But we need to uplift to more modern software as a service kind of platforms, I think.
Definitely. To anyone who wants to respond. So if you do partner with a vendor or a consultant or someone who is external to your company and lean on some sort of product or service that they're providing, do you find that the speed with which you can get a model into production, the way that the process works on that type of work and that type of problem, do you feel that it's very different, or does in the end it sort of feel the same? And feel free to respond to that in any way that would make sense to you.
I feel like it's ultimately the same amount of.
Same.
Oh, go ahead, Janak. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, I think it's ultimately the same. It just depends on what kind of models you're running and what kind of interactions you're having. But I feel it's ultimately the same. Jeff, I'll let you answer the question.
I was going to say, I think it ends up ultimately being the same amount of work. The perception sometimes is that if you let someone else do it, it might be faster, but then you've got to like tweak it more and kind of iterate more. And if you do it yourself, it feels like more work up front, but then like you own it and understand it, and it feels a little more thorough afterwards. But like the total cost of ownership always feels about the same to me.
Yeah,
I feel the same.
Yeah, because initially, like when you start off the RFP process, they show the POC and it's all shiny. But then when
it's all so easy. It's so easy.
Yeah, it's like you plug and play and you press a button and then boom, you have it. But when you actually go to like deploy it, like you need to. I think that's where like maybe I cut out for a second here, but yeah, when you try to customize it to your infrastructure, I think that's where you need to put a lot more work. And this is something you have to do because the vendor or the service will know how to do it.
That's exactly right.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Patricia, let's jump to the last question here as we kind of get close towards the end. Okay, so people say scaling AI projects around an organization is hard. Why is this so difficult? And how do you think about successful scaling? Jeff, would you like to kick off this last question?
So I think Janak hit on this earlier. And one of the biggest things with scaling a successful anything, that when you're delivering insights to people, whether it's just analytical insights or AI insights or whatever, is getting them to trust what you did. The only way that it scales out to lots of people is if they trust what you're doing and they kind of accept that and incorporate that into their daily operations. And that is the biggest hurdle, is getting past that, whatever you want to call it. There's like a hesitation or something there. In my experience, that's the biggest thing to get past that and move forward. Scaling technology-wise at this point is trivial, right? Scaling capacity-wise is kind of trivial. There's a lot more governance now you have to scale. There's a lot more responsibility and ownership. But for me anyways, and I don't know what the Yash and Janak, I think about this, but getting something outside of my group and across many groups to be absorbed by the organization really becomes a selling exercise to a large degree.
I would definitely +1 or +100 on that. Like
+300 on that.
Scaling on technology, it's a problem, but it's a known problem, and there are known solutions out there. Like what needs to be done. Like you can get cloud computing or like get more resources on-prem, whatever. But that mindset shift is like the biggest unlock. There people are skeptical to anything new. They're resistant to change. And generally, like there's also a lot of investment in like training and coaching them on how to use it. I think that's where, I've faced the biggest hurdle. And, like Jeff was saying, it becomes a selling exercise, right? You have to convince them why this is good for you in the long term, like some upfront investment right now.
Yeah. Sorry, Janak, I want to give you a chance before I go back on my soapbox.
And the thing is, it's also about changing, like, let's call it the experience driven, or people generally like to say, hey, I trust my judgment, I trust my intuition, I don't trust necessarily what the algorithm provides. It's about changing. When you want to scale, it's definitely about changing that mindset and that culture, and going into more of an agile experimental approach to say, the model, the data the model gives, one, definitely the trust factor. But once you get over the trust factor, it's about saying, how do you get the people to start leveraging the models? And it's not about going back to the leaders and getting the approvals. It's about trusting the models that it will do the work. That's the only way it will allow you to scale. And when you're building these models, if you can go away from a siloed approach to building an interdisciplinary team, and also looking at operational impacts, because most of the times the AI models has workflow impacts, it has operational impacts, it has business process impacts. And unless you get those people upfront involved, you're not going to find all those, let's call it workflow impacts, the operational impacts. And if you can build those changes in the operational impacts, that's when I found that the scaling becomes easy. Because if you're just building the models, typically what I found is in the initial stages, we used to build the models, but we never considered the workflow, the operational impacts. And we used to fail more on people not using because the workflow impact was not considered, the operational impact was not considered. So those are the couple of things that I found we need to change. And then the last thing is having an agile experimental mindset, because that's not something people typically have. At least most organizations don't have that digital mindset.
That's why everybody's in the middle of a digital transformation right now. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How many people actually adopt that mindset?
Yes.
It's easy to say, yes, you're going through the digital transformation, but when it comes down to actually deploying, you need that.
Right. We know it's a problem. We're going to get there. We're going to solve it. Yeah. Yeah. The selling portion is just difficult. It turns out that a bad argument when you have a really good model that predicts something is not that here's my model. I can prove that it's very good. And I can prove demonstrably that your anecdotes and insights yourself are wrong. That's not a good model to go sell that to somebody. You've got to really get buy-in as a group and kind of build that team around the idea and then give it to somebody.
Which is why you have to, when you're building the model, you need the team to work with you. Otherwise, it's never going to go anywhere.
You need to rally people right from the beginning that, this is something that, that's going to make your life easy. And, they need to buy into that thought.
Yep.
Wow. Well, thank you all so much for your insights. We are about out of time. It was such a pleasure having you all as a part of the event this year. Patrika, over to you. Are you still with us?
Of course I'm here. Thank you all so much. Janak, Yash, and Jeff, thank you so much for participating with us today and sharing these incredible insights. We appreciate you so much, and a special thank you to Dan for moderating and keeping us on track. A big virtual round of applause to all of you.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's our pleasure having you here today. And for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.